Today we honor Edward Stevenson and his families.
For the benefit of my posterity and that of the saints of Zion, as well as mankind in general, I undertake the arduous task of giving a narrative of my eventful life, labors, and reminiscences connected with the rise and progress of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I ardently desire that all my fellow men may have a full and correct understanding of the great events which have transpired in my days in the coming forth of the glorious gospel, the restoration of the holy priesthood, and the reestablishment of the kingdom of God on the earth. And so, according to my ability and in humble dependence on the aid of the Spirit of all truth, I proceed to describe the many scenes through which I have passed during the onward march of this marvelous work and a wonder.
The life and history of Elder Edward Stevenson, who was born 1st of May, 1820, in Gibraltar, Old Spain, which is under the dominion of Great Britain and a garrison. It is situated on the Mediterranean Sea and the south of Spain. It is only 3 miles long and 1/2 of a mile in width, containing from 15,000 to 20,000 population, and mostly military men. It is mostly a solid rock, and only suitable for a fortress, and for this it is eminent and essential to England.
My father was Joseph Stevenson, who was born at Barsby, Leicestershire, England, in the year of our Lord, 1787, October 21. He was a cooper by trade and visited London, England, about 1811, where he formed the acquaintance of Elizabeth Stevens, who was born in Old London. My mother was married to my father on the 28th June, 1812. She was born 11 August 1791 at St. Paul's, London, and christened at St. Paul's, London. Their eldest son, William, was born 10th June 1813. He was a printer by trade and published a paper in Wisconsin. He died without marriage 17 December 1840. I have done temple work for this worthy brother of mine. While I was in England in 1853, I found some old letters of interest at my uncle's, William and Edward, and my aunts, Fanny Smith and Margaret Stevenson Hill, who were all of them then living, and I preached the gospel to them. One item is in a letter dated 7 May 1812, number 9, Love Lane, Rotherhithe, London, England. I am under engagement to be married to Miss Elizabeth Stevens of London. In another letter, my wife is put to bed with a son, William, 10 June 1813. Joseph Stevenson, second son, was born 11th March 1815, christened as was also William at St. Paul, City of London. He died 14th December 1884, being 69 years, 9 months, and 3 days old. Married to Miss Esther B. Boone, October 20th, 1841. Henry D. Stevenson, third son, was born 12th September 1812 in Gibraltar, Old Spain. Died 21st May 1868, age 51. He married Elizabeth Hand, 10 May 1850. Edward Stevenson, fourth son, was christened July 8, 1823, in the Methodist Church. I remained on the rock until I was 7 years old. My father was a cooper by trade and received the favored appointment in the Ordnance Department from the Government Department as Master Cooper in Gibraltar. He had a large parchment as his appointment with a large salary and easy work only to superintend the cooper work. I remember that no one was allowed to go into the great magazines with boots on, but must draw their boots and put on slippers. Occasionally the powder kegs had to be opened and inspected, which had to be attended to by the coopers. My father held the position from 1816 to 1827, nearly 12 years. He purchased a residence and built a shop so as to employ his leisure time. He made a bass viol and played it in the Methodist choir, as he was a Methodist. I had been sprinkled into the Methodist Church before I could believe, as was the case with all of my father's children. My father made several violins as well as the bass viol, and also a piano and harp. Elizabeth Stevenson, the fifth child, married in her first marriage Joe Bailey in Lee County, Iowa. They had 2 children. Soon after he died, leaving her a widow. She was married second to Richard Norwood in her own house diagonally southwest from the courthouse. Mary Stevenson Clark, sixth child, was born 29 August 1825 at Gibraltar, Spain. Married Ezra T. Clark, 18 May 1845 in Iowa Territory. My brother James Stevenson, seventh child, was born August 11, 1830 at Albany, New York. He married Sarah Elnora White, November 3, 1852. In the year 1828, my father was inspired to leave the Rock and emigrate to America. Sold his home to a brother Methodist Smith. I can very well remember just before leaving Gibraltar of getting on board the United States frigate Constitution, a 3-decker. This ship left Gibraltar port for Boston at the same time that we did for New York, which was May 1828. We sailed on the ship Canning of Kingston. Our ship arrived at New York 16th July. We were about 60 days crossing the Atlantic. My father located in Brooklyn, New York, but soon moved to Albany, New York. Leaving the port of Gibraltar, we had fair wind, and while passing through the Narrows, we were fired upon by the Spanish, for our captain would not raise his colors as was required. The shot would splash the water behind us. On the corner of Mark Lane and Dean Street, my father carried on the coopering business for a few years, employing several journeymen. Good success attended my father's labors and business while he remained in Albany. He was taken in through misrepresentation of a farm not far from the city. It cost him a few $100s for this lesson. It was at this place that my youngest brother James was born. About the year 1830, my father moved on westward over the Erie Canal and lakes to Detroit, Michigan Territory, remaining only a short time at Detroit. My father explored the new country 24 miles north of Detroit near Pontiac and purchased some wild land, built a 2-story log house, and finally bought out a Mr. Judd, an improved farm making in all 240 acres of land. It joined a nice lake which assumed the name of Stevenson Lake. It was about 1 mile long and 1/2 of a mile in width. It abounded with fish such as pike, black bass, cove bass, rock bass, sunfish, perch, bull reeds, etc. It made a lovely homestead. But oh, how lonesome to us the screech of loon and owls, whippoorwill, and large bullfrogs was for a time hideous. Our neighbors were quite scattered. There were many lakes in that vicinity, and all of them were prolific with fish. It was a cold country, excellent for wheat, potatoes, rye, oats, etc. Wild fruit also abounded. Grapes, plums, huckleberries, and abundance of cranberries, which grew around the many marshes. My father built a skiff for our lake and nearly lost his life by upsetting in the lake. He made many calculations regarding lawns, garden walks, and beautifying his home, but was disappointed in death after a brief illness. I vividly remember seeing him draw his last breath, and close his eyes in that sleep which is solemn to behold. He was a good father, sober, honest, and loved and respected by all who knew him. I know it is well with him, and have done temple work for him. It was about 1832 when he died, leaving me only 12 years of age to grapple with the world. Dr. Richardson, a physician, desired me to live with him and be an M.D. I carried the mail for him 40 miles once a week and back to Plymouth, Wayne County, Michigan. At the age of 13, I was still with the doctor, and about 3 a.m. I witnessed the falling stars, which was the grandest and most sublime sight I ever beheld. No fear entered my mind, but joy rather than awe. This was in the fall, September, I believe. If every star in the heavens had been on the move, it could not have excelled the sight. It appeared to me as some of the meteors or stars came down near to the surface of Silver Lake, on the banks of which I stood. I always have accepted this as one of the signs spoken of in the 24th chapter of Matthew. It was only a short time after this when I joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I was baptized by Elder Japheth Fosdick in Silver Lake in the year 1833, December 20th, the church being only 3 years old. The missionary record of 1869 appears to be the earliest document which preserves the exact date of Edward's baptism as December 20, 1833. October 10, 1869, page 15, number 565, and the 30th Quorum of 70s record, page 1. I was living with Dr. Richardson and going to school when 2 Mormon elders, Jared Carter and Joseph Woods, came to preach, and I helped to give out the first appointment, making fun, not realizing who they were. But the very first discourse I heard, I was convinced of the truth. From a patriarchal blessing which I subsequently in the following year received from the first patriarch in the church, Joseph Smith, the father of our prophet, seer, and revelator, who said I was the leader of my father's house, one of the saviors upon Mount Zion. And so it proved to be. As I received the seed of truth in my heart, it took deep root. While now I record and incorporate this in my life's history, my eyes melt into tears at the mercy and goodness of God, the Eternal Father, who as my Heavenly Father, the Father of my spirit, accept him as my Father and my God. For I am flesh of his flesh, both in spirit and body. It was with no ordinary degree of moral courage that I obeyed the gospel, for it met with opposition from the beginning. Most of the people in our neighborhood believed the preaching when first it began by those 2 elders who were seen by the school children out in the woods praying in secret. Only a few, however, obeyed and eventually gathered to Missouri. Wonderful was the stir and change which was effected among the people. I can call to mind the first one who obeyed the glad message. It was Deacon Samuel Bent of the Presbyterian Church. Some, even his own wife, thought he was losing his mind. She came to my mother, they joining farms with us. My mother asked, "Does your husband continue to pray to the Lord?" "Yes," she said, "more devoted than ever." "But only think to join this new delusion." "Well," said Mother, "let us wait and see what will follow. If it is of God, it will stand. If not, it will fall." Others believed and obeyed until a branch was organized. Joseph Wood spoke in tongues. Also he prayed in the gift of unknown tongues. The testimony of the Spirit began to do its work with the elect of God, 1 of a city and 2 of a family. "And I will bring you to Zion. I bear my testimony before God solemnly that these words are true. For from 13 years of age to now 71, I have grown in knowledge and understanding until my heart rejoices that God moved upon my dear old father to bring me to the land of Jacob, which he gave and sealed upon Joseph. Father Joseph Smith, as a patriarch in 1834, laid hands on me and said that I was one of the sons of Jacob through the loins of Ephraim, and one of the horns spoken of, and that I should do so by pushing the people together. The bringing of the gospel to us with the Book of Mormon as a new revelation has literally fulfilled the above words, and today, 1891, many of that time and place rejoice in the Holy One of Israel. I fully believe that God moved upon the father of our prophet Joseph Smith to emigrate from Vermont to New York State to Palmyra, close by where the Lord had a work for this young man to do. Why not? For it proved to be so. Then I am expressly inclined to believe that the Spirit of the Lord rested upon my father, bringing me where, in 1833, I received the gospel, and then became a Savior to my father's house. The following year, after the organization of the Pontiac branch in October 1834, we had the pleasure of having a visit from the prophet Joseph Smith, a plain but noble-looking man of large frame and about 6 feet high. With him was his father Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris, whose sister Sophia Kellogg lived in our settlement. A great stir was made in this settlement at so distinguished visitors. The meetings held were crowded to see and hear the testimonies given, which were very powerful. I will here relate my own experience on the occasion of a meeting in our old log schoolhouse. The prophet stood at a table for the pulpit, where he began relating his vision, and before he got through, he was in the midst of the congregation with uplifted hand. I do believe that there was not one person present who did, at the time being, or who was not convicted of the truth of his vision of an angel to him. His countenance seemed to me to assume a heavenly whiteness, and his voice was so piercing and forcible for my part, it so impressed me as to become indelibly imprinted on my mind. I do not wish to be understood that all present continued to feel the conviction abide with them. But while under its influence, they were so deeply impressed that they could not gainsay. In those meetings, the prophet said the gifts and signs should follow the believers, as they did the ancient saints in the days of our Savior's administration. And said he, "By this shall ye prove me to be a true prophet." My testimony is to all who may read these lines, that I both saw and heard the gifts follow those who believed and obeyed the gospel. I will name some who I remember spoke in tongues: Elijah Fordham, Mary Curtis, Mary Bent, Joseph Wood, and others that I do not now remember. The 3 witnesses bore their testimonies as to seeing the angel and hearing his voice. There were many who were baptized, and the first love was very warm, and we felt to be of one heart and one mind. My mother was baptized before I was, but when I was baptized 1 mile from our house in Silver Lake by Elder Japheth Fosdick, I skipped home so lightly and happy that I felt as though I could fly over trees on my way home. And this love increased in me so that I looked forward during the week to the happy times of meeting. Greater anxiety than for any party or other pleasure I ever enjoyed. This the effect the love of the gospel had upon myself, and I thank God for that testimony that the Holy Ghost gave me. During the prophet's visit to Pontiac, he visited our house. I got him some very early apples, and he dined with us, and while looking over our very large book of martyrs, he felt a degree of sympathy for those martyrs and expressed hopes for many of those who had suffered death for their faith as far as they understood, and borrowed the book to take home with him to return it to us when we met in Zion, Missouri, which he did do, saying, "Mother Stevenson, I have seen those martyrs by aid of the Urim and Thummim." He also looked over our large Bible and remarked that much of the Apocrypha was true. In his review of the Book of Martyrs and Bible, he said there are thousands of good people in England and those old countries who are waiting for the fullness of the gospel, and it will not be long before they will flock to Zion, for Ephraim dwells largely in those parts. The visit of this man of God to our house and the testimonies of the 3 witnesses left a lasting remembrance. At the age of only 14 in 1834, I packed my all in a little 50-cent box, and with only $1 in my pocket, I set out for Zion in Liberty, Clay County, Missouri, on foot and alone, and soon arranged with Brother Thaddeus Alvard to drive his ox team, which was going with a company also to Zion. We had a prosperous journey and safely landed in Zion. We found wild game by the way and occasionally killed some. Here I found myself alone in the midst of strangers, but in a very rich timbered country, soil capable of producing 60 to 100 bushels of corn to the acre. Missouri was a slave state, hence many Negroes interspersed, and the people were generally uneducated. The climate was very temperate, and winters merely nominal compared with Michigan. Truly, as we had learned from our prophet, that Jackson County was the Eden where Adam our father was placed in the beginning. Well, it is a lovely country, and so free from eruptions, mountains, and lakes. Yes, Jackson County was pointed out by the finger of the Lord as the center stake of Zion. Soon after our arrival in Missouri, I commenced to learn the tinner's trade with Mr. Henry Coleman, who carried on business in Liberty, Clay County, Missouri. I was pleased with the business and progressed nicely. The Missourians began to hold mass meetings in Liberty to see what they should do with the Mormons. They were increasing so fast by gathering into their county, and they said the Mormons were so united and would all vote one way, so that fears came upon them. I used to attend those meetings, and it became very apparent that our time was short among them. Threats increased of mob violence if we did not leave the country peaceably. Being of tender years, I began to more fully realize my situation, being alone in the midst of a hostile people. In reality, there was only one alternative, and that was to trust in God and His promises, for there were only a few of us, and the whole world arrayed against us. This was applicable to my case, and I looked forward to the time when my mother would follow me with my 2 younger sisters and James, and kept on at my trade with renewed hope, looking forward to greater happiness. In 1836, I walked 30 miles in one day to meet my mother at Richmond, Ray County. This indeed was a happy meeting. We remained in Richmond for a while. I continued at my trade. We subsequently moved to Far West, Caldwell County, Missouri. In Far West, I heard the prophet Joseph say in a frame schoolhouse not yet finished, he said, "Brethren, we are gathering to this beautiful land to build up a Zion, which is the pure in heart. But since I have been here, I perceive the spirit of selfishness and covetousness exists in the hearts of the saints, which is not becoming those who receive the spirit of the gospel. Here are those who begin to spread out, buying up all the land they are able to do, to the exclusion of the poorer ones, were not so much blessed with this world's goods, thinking to lay foundations for themselves only, looking to their own individual families. Now I want to tell you that Zion cannot be built up in any such way. We are called out from the world to learn God's ways, to become one, looking each to his brother's interest and welfare, the widow, the fatherless, and the poor without distinction. This was in 1836 when Joseph Smith came up on a visit, for I remember a collection being taken up for him, and I gave the last 50 cents I had, having been up to Fort Leavenworth working for 50 cents per day. In 1836 my mother had moved into Clay County, forming a little branch about 2 miles from Liberty, where I continued to work at my tinner's trade. I used to go out to meetings, which were held under the shade of the great trees. The Spirit of the Lord attended those meetings, giving us renewed courage and hopes in the midst of our trials which we were passing through. In October 1836, the gathering continued quite rapid to Shoal Creek, as it was called. There were 2 streams which united, about 1.5 miles, and far west was between those streams, called Goose Creek and Shoal Creek. In December 1836, a petition was gotten up for the incorporation of a new county, which was granted and named Caldwell County. New life and hope inspired every Latter-day Saint, being in possession of freedom and happiness and a large wild country to settle in, with plenty of wild game and wild bees in the timber in the hollow trees. Honey could be bought for 50 cents per gallon. In January 1837, government land was being bought up fast, and preparations for putting in crops in early spring. Houses sprang up like magic, and everyone was busy. I left my trade about this time and went out to Fort Madison on the Missouri River with a company to make bricks for 50 cents per day. It was about 60 miles from far west. The Kickapoo and Potawatomi Indian tribes were mixed up in small bands near Fort Leavenworth. A few miles out from the fort there was an Indian village with houses, fields, teams, and also a meeting house. I attended some of their meetings. They sang, prayed, and preached, and appeared very much interested and impressed. Certainly I very much admired their devotion, for they were sincere. My mother had sold 80 acres of the Michigan farm, leaving the balance in Mr. Joshua Terry's care for rent. The team, wagon, and harness which remained after arriving here in November was placed in the hands of a brother Music, who was to pay her 20 acres of timberland and build a house on a lot my mother had purchased in Far West, not far from the central portion of the city and present temple site. As the house was not completed, the stone chimney not finished, we borrowed a team and wagon to get the rock a few miles southeast of the city. When I had loaded the wagon, it was near sunset. As I was driving out from the quarry, I found the wagon was going over. Holding on to the lines, I sprang from the top of the load, and would have cleared myself nicely but for the single-tree row directly in my way, and I was made fast by the chain traces, and the wagon overturned, the horses on their backs, and no way for my escape, and me at the mercy of those animals, liable to be kicked to death while fastened by chains, they being twisted around both legs just above the knees. Most certainly I was in a painful and perilous condition, and nearly night. What could I do? No cutting chains, traces, no one to advise or pity me, only God to deliver me. But a bright hope sprang to view. I remembered seeing 2 men some time previous to my perilous condition not far away passing over the hills on foot. My shouts were answered by one of the 2 men appearing not far away, who turned and beckoned his other fellow. and lost no time in coming to my relief. To me it was an angel who hove in sight, and soon by my side a deliverer indeed, for so it proved to be. While the hinder part of the horse was raised, sufficient to loosen the trace, which I soon loosened by unhitching from the single tree hook. What on earth kept those horses so quiet I could only account for as was predicted upon my head by Patriarch Joseph Smith Sr. The devil, he said, desired to sift us as wheat, but God shall set his angels to preserve you in the hour of need. And now, strange as it may appear, the first man who came to my relief after my arrival at home was Patriarch Joseph Smith, who helped me from the horse, for I was unable to stand alone without help. And my angel deliverers helped me on my team, which I safely brought back to Far West. The Patriarch rubbed my legs, which were swollen, for the chains tightened by the weight of the horses drew the flesh nearly to the bones. But, said the Patriarch, administering to me, you shall be healed and walk around tomorrow. And indeed it proved true. We finally completed the stone chimney, and small as I was, I managed to mow with the hand scythe, hay cut from the wild prairie, stacked it up on a shed under which our cow could stand, and secure the hay, as our town lots were not yet fenced. Having accomplished what seemed to me, compared with more modern times, almost a miracle, I was ready to go back to work at Fort Leavenworth again. This time we had a horse to ride, and we would change by one riding ahead a distance, hitch, and then walk on, leaving the horse for the next, and continue to do so until all were served with a ride. A ride of this kind could be all the better appreciated, much more so than to ride all the time and get tired of riding. An accident occurred. I well remember the old clumsy horse falling with me on him, he falling on my leg, which lamed me some, but not seriously. Nothing more, only hard work marred our peace until we earned more money and returned home. I availed myself of 1/4 of schooling at a select school, the only opportunity which offered me a ghost of a chance for advancement in the science of education since I was 13 years of age. I have great reason to rejoice in my lot and life of this important time of the church history. I am all the more thankful now to know I was enabled to fight the good fight alone without anyone to give me a single acre, house, or even $1, and to be able to pay my own school bills, clothe myself, and also to be a blessing to my widowed mother. I have heard the prophets say that they, his enemies, should find more mercy at his hands than he ever found of them. Nevertheless, justice cannot rob mercy, neither mercy rob justice. When I for a moment realized that I, with so much less advantage of the rudiments of book learning than my fellow schoolmates, I can all the more be thankful to God for his watch care of myself. Truly the race is not to the mighty and swift, but rather to the humble, prayerful, and poor who put their trust in the Lord. Soon after the winter of 1837, I again took another trip to Fort Leavenworth, for our wants and necessities required aid and help, and I was able and willing to work and earn bread by the sweat of the brow. This time my labor changed. I made an engagement to cook for a company of 13 persons who were engaged in getting out timber, shingles, and lumber for the fort. I was to have $15 per month for this time, and it was said that I was a good cook. I soon learned to make good light bread, which we had to bake in iron-baked kettles. We put the iron cover on the fire to get to a certain heat, the kettle on some coals, and the light dough in the kettle. Let it raise some, then put live embers on top of the rimmed cover under the kettle, and watched closely that it did not burn the bread. If not quite hot enough, increase with embers, and with care and a little judgment, we would have good, sweet, and wholesome bread. One time I well remember when we went to the fort from our camp. After arriving at the turbulent and muddy Missouri River, our company went down the river in a boat. 2 of the men were going to swim the river, and so was I, but under their protest as they thought it too much for the boy cook. I counted myself a good swimmer. We left our clothes with the boat, and we 3 plunged into the mighty Missouri River. The river was about 1 full mile wide at this point. After we had been out some time, the force of the current had taken us a long way down the river, and it seemed to us not far over the stream. But finally we safely made in due time the opposite bank, and a real long way down. No doubt but this was a great adventure. In due time, with my hard-earned money, I returned home, this being my last trip in that direction. Daviess County is an excellent county of land, timber, and prairie with the Grand River running through it. It was here that I took up a 40-acre farm and split the first rails of my life to fence some of the land and put in a crop. Although it was a hard undertaking, I accomplished the task with a degree of pride and pleasure, believing I could be benefited by raising something from the ground to aid my mother's family. This would be about 12 or 14 miles out towards Adirondack Island, which was on the Grand River, northeast of Far West, about 25 miles. There was quite a boom in May and June past. Property went up high by reason of increased immigration. At this time there was much said, and very justly too, in my opinion, regarding the word of wisdom. They who disobeyed the word of wisdom were not held in full fellowship. On the 3rd of July, 1838, there was a general meeting of the saints in Far West. About 1,500 met and had a grand time. Ground was broken for a temple, 110 feet by 80 feet, a house of the Lord to be reared in this our day, and on this holy land once occupied by our father Adam. It seemed like a dream almost to me that I should be so favored to be one of this happy and favored assemblage, for it is fresh to my mind, and especially on the following day, the honored 4th of July. About this time, my only 2 sisters, Elizabeth and Mary, were baptized by David W. Patton. We held a celebration this day which I shall never forget, as I was 17 years old. Missionaries arrived in England on the 20th of this month. I recollect that the prophet Joseph Smith at my mother's house in October 1834, while dining with us, said there were thousands of the children of Ephraim in Europe waiting for the gospel. And now we will test the prophet's words, for I felt the weight of his many good words and witnessed the influence and inspiration attending them, although I was then only 1 year old in the church and felt as though we were highly honored by entertaining a prophet of God who had stood in the presence of God the Father and Jesus Christ, his only begotten, upon this earth. We heard him tell in his plain, simple way about this open vision, and also of the visit of Moroni, the angel, to him. I had a testimony of the truth, for the Spirit of God witnessed and the Holy Ghost sealed upon me his truthful words. And as I expect this history will be handed down to my sons, daughters, grand and great-great-grandchildren, and perhaps be sought after by others, I wish here to leave written and seal my testimony, God and angels bearing my witness, that I personally knew and heard not only the testimony of the prophet, but his father Joseph the patriarch. And still further, I saw and heard the 3 witnesses bear their testimonies, And I do know and testify to all that I do know of a surety that these things are true. And to all I say, investigate. Sincerely and prayerfully read the Book of Mormon, asking God for His Spirit, and the Lord will not withhold from you a testimony of their divinity. I testify, for one, He did so to me. The coming forth of this book and the evidence, biblical, historical, and personal, are of such force and character that it carries conviction to every honest heart. There is no reason for doubt but this very country round about has been reserved and watched over for a wise and glorious purpose. Here in the Garden of Eden, and Adam on thy Amen, where Adam finished his work and blessed his posterity, and where he will come again in the last days to conclude his work, as referred to by Daniel the prophet. Coonskins made the men's caps, dressed deerskins their clothes. The women wore sunbonnets, spun and wove their own clothes. 8 yards made their dress in those times. In the fall the ox wagon was loaded up with wild honey, smoked deer hams, and some coon and deer, and some fur skins, and made a 120-mile round trip, trade for groceries, a calico dress, and return home proud enough. Marrowbone and Honey Creek were settled up, and it was a most lovely place like Eden. Indeed, it was near here where I took up my land. In the fall of 1838, I, in connection with many others, were mobbed from our homes in Daviess County. I only got 1 wagon load of product from my 40 acres. Neither did I receive 1 cent for the property. I distinctly remember on one night the big horn blew, which was a signal for all to gather to the public square, armed and equipped. I was there with my gun and blanket, and word was that the mob was gathering secretly to destroy the peace and lives of our brethren at Adam on thy Amen. It was 25 miles, and we had to go out there on foot, but baggage wagons were provided to carry our luggage. I was very small in stature. Some of the brethren were expostulating with me about my not being able to perform the journey on foot. But just at that time, Apostle David W. Patton came along, hearing what was said, replied, "Just let that boy alone. He will do just as much good as any of you," saying unto me, "Bub, put your baggage in the wagon and come right along." This gave me renewed courage, and I shall never forget the good impression which Captain Fearnot, so-called, made upon my mind. We were encamped in Adam on thy Amen, and mostly around campfires without tents. One night the snow fell 4 or 5 inches on us. In the morning it certainly looked like a hard warfare. The prophet, seeing our forlorn condition, called on us to form into 2 parties in battle array. Lyman White at the head of one line, and he, Joseph the prophet, heading the other line, and have a sham battle, and the weapons to be used were snowballs. We set to with a will full of glee and fun. Thus the prophet was cheerful, often wrestling and leading off in games. I once remember his wrestling with Sidney Rigdon, and he had his pants torn badly, but he had a good laugh over it. On one occasion it began to look serious, as it was reported that the mob was coming into our town, and we were marched out beyond Adam's altar. I was one of a company who marched to Millport during the night. We passed a company of our men who had captured one of the mob's cannon and were taking it to our camp in Adam on thy Amen. That night is before me as I penned these lines as if only last week, and I have cause to remember it with feet wet and our legs as well, cold as it was that frosty night. We were compelled to lie down on the bare floor, with only our guns and our arms as companions, shivering with cold and no supper either to comfort us. But the greatest comfort was to know that our cause was the gospel's sake, a just cause indeed, not knowing how soon our enemy might fall upon us, a little handful. Our orders were, no lights, keep silent, put out guards, and wait to see what comes next. Shivering with cold and wet, we worried the night away, when we found relief by making log fires and getting warm, and breakfast as best we could. Soon after sunrise, we heard the captured cannon speak, and the Missourians said that the Mormons had the power of the resurrection, for they raised the dead and made him speak. The cannon had been buried, and was found buried in the road. The pigs had rooted the dirt from off it, and it was discovered. Tears of sorrow coursed down many cheeks in those inhuman days. Our camp was quartered near and inside of Adam's altar, and to know this served to more fully inspire us in defense of our families, friends, our sacred liberties, our religion, and our God. About this time I visited the sacred spot in company with Joseph Smith and others, when Joseph pointed out the altar. Turning to the lovely valley below us, in a large bend of Grand River, here, said the prophet, is the real valley where Father Adam called his posterity together and blessed them. Also he stated that the Garden of Eden, from whence Adam was driven, was Jackson County, our center state, where a great temple will be reared. This place was first called Spring Hill until it was revealed to our prophet May 19, 1838. It is about 70 miles southwest from Adam's altar to Independence, Jackson County, Missouri. I was cook for our first 10, camped in the suburbs of this altar. The whole state turned mob with Governor L.W. Boggs and his exterminating order. What then could we as a little handful do but to submit and leave the county and surrounding counties and concentrate into the city of Far West to await God's deliverance? For that was our only and last resort. 25 October 1838, the long horn or bugle blew a call for all to rally. I, with my blanket, gun, etc., met the brethren near the temple lock. I was one who volunteered for guard. My tour came on the last watch, so on account of a scarcity of men, I was stationed on the road of the battlefield, about 1/4 of a mile out from the city, and all alone. I took my position in a hazelnut bunch of brush. All went along quietly, only very lonely, and it proved to be the time of the battle being fought wherein Apostle David W. Patton fell a victim by Captain Bogart's mob. Also P.O. Banyan was killed by the picket guard. Gideon Carter also was killed. Brother William Hendricks was wounded in the neck and crippled for life. Now comes an incident of my life which I will leave on record for my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren, and all following generations to read, for this occurred in the days of my youth, being then 18 years of age, but very small in stature, so much so that the prophet called me Bub on the occasion of my cocking my gun on him, the prophet of God. With him was Hiram Smith, his brother, and also Lyman White. This occurred on the morning of October 25th, 1838. Just before the break of day, the above-named brethren were passing on the way to the Crooked River battlefield, and I was on guard all alone and about 1/4 of a mile from Far West City. On hearing horsemen approaching, I made ready to receive them in becoming style, cocking my gun and placing myself in the center of the road. It was the darkest time of the 24 hours, just before the break of day. At length they approached within a few yards, when I demanded, "Who comes there?" "Friends," was the reply. "Friends, halt and advance and give the countersign." Lyman White rode close under my cocked gun, halt, and gave the countersign, which was satisfactorily given, God and Liberty. I then, of course, gave the way, bringing my rifle to a shoulder. In passing Lyman White, Colonel said, "Bub, I have sidearms," at the same time clapping his sword and holster pistols with his hand. "Well," said I, "if you had not the countersign, it would be you and I for it." At this, the prophet Joseph said laughingly, pleased and encouragingly, "That is right, bub." The morning brought to light a sad and fatal day to Zion. The prophet said, "I saw Captain Patton in a most distressing condition. His wound was incurable." The prophet said, "Brother David W. Patton was a very worthy man, beloved by all good men who knew him. He was one of the 12 apostles and died as he lived, a man of God, and strong in the faith of a glorious resurrection, in a world where mobs will have no power or place." One of his last expressions to his wife was, "Whatever you do else, oh, do not deny the faith." Edward Stevenson and his first wife, Nancy Rita Porter, were the proud parents of 5 children, 3 sons and 2 daughters. Nephi Porter Stevenson was born July 15, 1846, at Council Bluffs, Pottawatomie County, Iowa, and was married December 16, 1865, in the Endowment House at Salt Lake City to Louisa Stewart. She bore him 8 children. She died March 7, 1891, age 45, at Fielding, Box Elder County, Utah, and was buried March 10th in the Farmington City Cemetery, Davis County, Utah. He died July 12, 1918, age 71, at Kirk's Hot Springs, Bannock County, Idaho, and was buried July 15th at Chalice, Custer County, Idaho. Eliza Stevenson was born April 16, 1848, at Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, Utah, and was married December 16, 1865, in the Endowment House at Salt Lake City to John Riley Stewart. She bore him 10 children. He died December 21, 1916, age 76, at Ogden, Weaver County, Utah, and was buried December 23rd in the Ogden City Cemetery. She died March 30th, 1934, age 85, at Montpelier, Bear Lake County, Idaho, and was buried April 2nd in the Montpelier Cemetery. Edward Alonzo Stevenson was born March 28, 1850, at Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, Utah, and was married October 24, 1870, in the Endowment House at Salt Lake City to Emmeline Stewart. She bore him 9 children. Emmeline died February 24, 1888, age 36, at Curlew, Cassia County, Idaho. He married second, August 20th, 1896, at Enterprise, Wallowa County, Oregon, Phoebe Elizabeth Brackenbury. She bore him 12 children. He died January 28, 1938, age 87, at Portland, Multnomah County, Oregon, and was buried January 30th in the Portland City Cemetery. Nancy Elizabeth Stevenson was born July 22, 1852, at Salt Lake City, and died May 5, 1853, age 1. She was buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Joseph Echo Porter Stevenson was born October 1, 1857, at Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, Utah, and was married December 8, 1881, in the Endowment House at Salt Lake City to Mary Alice Richards. She bore him 7 children. She died February 13, 1926, age 62, at Riverton, Salt Lake County, Utah, and was buried February 16th in the Farmington City Cemetery, Davis County, Utah. He married second, May 19, 1927, at Salt Lake City, Sarah Grace Dolan. There were no children by this marriage. She died December 1, 1933, age 66, at Utica, Crawford County, Wisconsin, and was buried December 4. He died June 23, 1929, age 71, at Santa Cruz County, California, and was buried June 27th in the Oakwood Cemetery at Santa Cruz. Edward Stevenson married second, September 6, 1852, Sarah Porter. They had no children. Sarah was born September 11, 1816, at Plymouth, Oneida County, New York, a sister of his first wife. She died June 26, 1841, age 24, at Augusta, Lee County, Iowa, and was buried there. Edward Stevenson was married and sealed October 28, 1855, in the President's office at Salt Lake City, to his third wife, Elizabeth Jane Dufresne. They were the proud parents of 8 children, 6 sons and 2 daughters. Elizabeth Jane Dufresne Stevenson was born March 18, 1857, at Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, Utah, and was married December 25, 1884, in the Endowment House at Salt Lake City to Charles Frederick Wilcox. She bore him 6 children. He died October 22, 1931, age 72, at Salt Lake City, and was buried October 25th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. She died January 22, 1947, age 89, at Salt Lake City, and was buried January 25th in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Mary Arita Dufresne Stevenson was born July 7, 1860, at Salt Lake City, and died July 4, 1864, age 3, at Salt Lake City. She is buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. James Edward Dufresne Stevenson was born April 29, 1862, at Salt Lake City, and died there October 2, 1863, age 1. He is buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Ezra Thompson Dufresne Stevenson was born October 29, 1864, at Salt Lake City, and was married June 22, 1893, in the Salt Lake Temple to Mary Amelia Haven Burton. She bore him 1 child. She died July 27, 1897, age 30, at Salt Lake City, and was buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. He married second July 18, 1901, in the Salt Lake Temple, Rhoda Richards. She bore him 6 children. She died November 3, 1956, age 78, at Salt Lake City, and was buried November 6 in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. He died July 17, 1952, age 87, in Salt Lake City, and was buried July 19 in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. George Franklin Dufresne Stevenson was born April 18, 1867, at Salt Lake City, and died September 2, 1868, age 1. He is buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Samuel Wilford Dufresne Stevenson was born April 16, 1869, at Salt Lake City, and died May 3, 1869, aged 3 weeks. He is buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Brigham Young Dufresne Stevenson was born March 18, 1876, at Salt Lake City, and died March 19, 1876, aged 1 day. He is buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Moroni Charles Stevenson was born December 17, 1877, at Salt Lake City, and died June 29, 1899, aged 21. He is buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. Total known posterity of Edward Stevenson as of August 16, 1986. 27 children, 142 grandchildren, 804 great-grandchildren, 958 second-great-grandchildren, for a total posterity of 1,931. There are 752 total spouses of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, etc., making a total posterity, including spouses, of 2,683.
As descendants of these fine and faithful people, Let us remember their strong, wonderful qualities and try to live our lives to make them proud of us.